Hello, friends, and welcome once again to our Monday class series. And this being the end of pretty much close, the end of 2021, it's somewhat natural every year when we come to this time when the 1 year is closing and we're getting ready to go into a new one. It's somewhat natural that we tend to look back, and there's often we do programs on, you might say, making affirmations for the coming year, or perhaps introspecting, looking back on what happened in the year prior. And so, in a sense, I began to think about that general topic, and I'd like to share a few thoughts about that in today's program. And I was I'd like to begin by just mentioning that every culture, you could almost any culture that's except perhaps the most primitive, any culture that has a calendar has to find a way to mark the years when 1 year begins and another year ends. And we look at the stars and we look at the passing of the seasons. And it's most cultures pick 1 or 2 times of the year when to begin the new year. Historically, ancient times, one of them would be springtime, the equinox. And they look, you can see the natural rhythms of the stars and of the seasons. Springtime is a natural one. It's beginning something new. The winter's past and now new start, a new start. But of course, then there's many cultures too that we start with, you might say, the solstice, when that sun has reached the uh, full extent of from the northern hemisphere. The sun rises later and later, and on the horizon it goes further south. Days become shorter and shorter until it reaches that point of the solstice, which is December 21st, roughly, every year. And at that point, it then begins its march back to the north. And this, of course, in many cultures was a time of celebration, that time of the winter solstice, when it was a mark that everything's now on the upward trend. You could say, in terms of the outward world, we're in the depths of winter, but hope is on the horizon. And I think that tradition is embodied in the modern world. Although we ended up, probably the new year should probably begin right there, but we've got January 1st, according to this Western calendar, I guess it is, that we're using these days in much of the world. And we're just about there. And this principle of renewal, this principle of putting the past behind, we're now starting something new. And I think the world at large has had a pretty rough last 2 years for the pandemic, and here we are again, still in another wave of that pandemic. But yet, the heavens themselves say hope is there for a new beginning, a new horizon. The sun is heading on its northward journey, which is more of an outward journey because things are rising at this time. And so let's look at the coming months, the coming year in that sense. It's a time for renewal. It's a time for looking at positive alternatives. And so I wanted to, in that vein, I was thinking about this vein, and I remembered a story as I was thinking that Master tells of, uh, he names him Saint Maduski. Now, some of you know this story, but for those of you who don't, uh, he, he wrote it in his old preceptor lessons, and I think in the self-realization lessons, they're also it's in there. And the story of Saint Maduski goes like this: he was a great, I don't know, I don't know if he was a historical master, used that name Maduski as if it was some real person, but a person who loved peace, and he was an ambassador for peace relations between the nations. And he had to attend a peace conference. He was flying in Europe. He was flying uh, either to Geneva or from Geneva, but he had to go over the Alps. and he had to, but the weather was very bad, and this would have been in the early part of the 20th century, and he was flying in a simple plane in those days, and he had to fly, and people warned him not to go because the weather was really bad, but he was determined, and so he sets out, on his plane, and he finds a little bit of sunshine in order so that he can get to his destination. He's in clear sky, and he's relieved that he's found some clear air, and he looks like he's going to make his destination on time. But then he looks out from his plane. He has the cockpit of his plane, and he looks out and he noticed that in those days, of course, there was wires that would connect to the wings and so on. And he noticed that there's a rat that is somehow grabbed onto his plane and is taking the journey with him outside the plane hanging on to the outside one of the wings, perhaps. And the rat has begun to gnaw at one of the control wires, and he started to gnaw at it. And if he gnaws at that wire long enough, he's going to cut it, and he's going to lose total control of the plane, and he's up over the mountains, and he's going to crash. So I think, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so he does various maneuvers trying to knock the rat off, but that rat is tenacious and is hanging on, and he's hanging on to that wire and continuing to gnaw at it. Well, uh, okay, I see somebody that I'm going to turn original sound on. Is my sound not? Let me see what that. Let me see if I can do something with the Bara. If you can suggest something, I see somebody's having trouble with the volume.
We can hear you pretty well. I think on the phone is often hard to hear, but you can wear headphones if you have. If your volume is at the maximum, Jayaji, then
Oh, my volume is up to maximum, and I turned original sound on, so I hope it's okay. But this is the best I do. By the way, I'm broadcasting from our recording studio, and we have a much better microphone there, but I can't do that today because it's a big snowstorm happening right now, and it's snowing outside, and I had to pretty much stay home. So I'm using the computer as microphone. Maybe that's one of the problems.
yeah,
Let
maybe
me,
just talk a little louder and turn off the original. So make sure it's not on. Off is better than on.
okay, let me turn off then. Oh, I'll turn off. Okay, it's off now. Okay, and I'll pull this closer and get closer. See if we can do that. Okay, so Saint Maduski, he was flying up up over the Alps, and that rat was gnawing at the control wires. The and he tries to knock him off, and he can't. And finally, what he does is he comes up with an ingenious solution. He goes higher, and he's at 10,000 feet, and he goes up to 15. He goes up, finally gets up to 20,000 feet, and he's in his little cockpit. He has oxygen. So, but the rat doesn't. He's outside, and finally the rat expires and falls off the plane. And Master uses this, and Saint Maduski is able then to come and continue his journey. And Master uses this as an image for us to keep in mind is when troubles assail us, go higher. When negativity assails us, go higher. In other words, be positive. Don't go down to the level, and try to solve all your problems on the level in which those problems. And I wanted to read what Master says about that in his, because he says it very nicely. And so I'm going to read this from what he says. Master, quoting him, says, "The above story illustrates that those who have a firm faith in God will be inspired to receive conscious directions in regard to overcoming their problems. True devotees learn from God how to overcome menacing evils by lifting their consciousness to higher and better spheres of existence. The principal moral of the whole story emphasizes that you must conquer evil not by doing evil, but by lifting yourself to the sphere of goodness and conquering greed by self-control, restlessness by calmness, hatred by love, evil habits by good habits, revengefulness by forgiveness, and habits of mental distraction by continued meditation. Then it goes on, as the rat was killed in the finer etheric atmosphere, so also all wicked mental habits, which are gnawing at the vital happiness of the soul, can be automatically eliminated by transferring the mind to a higher level of consciousness established by continued deep meditation. And so it was, he said it there much better than I ever could, that this being the darkest time of the year, we can't fight darkness on its own level. And of course, the days pass in this coming southward seasons to the sun begins to rise. So within us, we must rise above when we're faced with darkness. And in the process of rising above, that darkness fall away. And this is important for us to remember, because this, in a sense, is, in other words, this was what Lahiri Mahashaya also meant when he said, solve all problems with Kriya Yoga. It's through the practice of our Kriya that we are able to rise above those problems and to be able to see something from a higher level. And when we're on a lower level and in the daily activities of life, the possibility of a higher perspective, more vast than we possess, it never really occurs to people. They very, very strongly, I have to find a solution. I have to find a solution. I have to find a solution. But to rise to a new level of understanding, so that when we see that maybe there really is no problem, the solution is staring us straight in the face, doesn't occur. And it's like explaining to a child that they see the problem from their own perspective, but as an adult, we know that there's a larger reality there that is there, and we can see it. But you can say that to a child, but it doesn't make any sense at that age. But it is for us as devotees, as Kriya bonds, is to be able to uplift ourselves into that higher reality. And just like the adult knows that there is a greater perspective, so it's true for us. And Master says somewhere in rereading that story, he says, God comes to the true devotee, when he has problems, he'll come to his aid, but often not in the way that might be expected, because of course the infinite has many ways, and it's not the obvious ones that we might think. But light comes in the midst of darkness if we can learn to awaken that light. And as I've said before many times, perhaps, Swami used to say, just like in a tomb in Egypt, they may have been buried for centuries or millenniums, that you open that tomb up and the light shines into that darkness of 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. It's driven away just with that one ray of sun. And so I've always kept that in mind when faced with troubles, faced with difficulties, that we have to do our best, of course, on the level that we are in the media. But this is why the devotee, of course, calls to God, and if we can remember to call on God in those moments and train ourselves, you see, that's why we meditate and practice every day, is to train ourselves that at those times of darkness, to remember the light, to be able to draw that light. And from that position, we see our problems and we see the doubts. And when we see, you see the troubles and are able to find a solution quite easily. Or you don't find a solution, you might say we open the window or we turn on the light so that God can provide us with that solution at that time. But I've kept this, as I say, I've kept this in mind. But in the other hand, this other question has often come to me, and I thought, well, that's good, but sometimes looking back over, like we're doing, I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes at the beginning of the year, we look back and we reflect on the past year, our victories, perhaps our failures. And of course, we want to affirm, okay, in the new year, I'm going to leave all that behind. But we can't help, and at least I can't help, by thinking about what about the mess I left behind? You know, I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, maybe not this year, but in past years. When I was younger, who knows when, other lifetimes. What about all that mess don't I have, looking forward, don't I have a responsibility there to fix all that and to deal with it? And the answer is yes, we do. And you pause, dot, dot, dot. But it's that but. Yes, we do have responsibility, but our first responsibility is to get ourselves out of the ditch that we found ourselves in. The first responsibility is to get out of that state of the problem that's arisen. If we find that we're in the mud, we have to get out of the mud. Then we can help other people out of the mud. And so if we've created a mess for ourselves, we can't wallow in the contemplation of it. If we really want to be responsible and fix things, we got to get out of the mess first with our own selves, and then we can look back. And that's why Master said to Swami, after Swami had gone to the hospital to console a man who was on his deathbed, and the man kept saying, "Oh, I've done so many bad things in this life. I've done so many bad things in this life." And he was looking back, in other words, and he expired, passed on in that consciousness of looking back. And Master, when he heard that, he says, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have said that." To be looking backward. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a time for looking back and fixing things, but that time is when we have found ourselves in the light. And in the meantime, we do our best. We might say we focus our attention, getting to a point where we can be effective. Those things. Now, if you have an immediate problem in front of you, that time might be real close. But sometimes I think back. Oh yes, when I was a college student, oh my God, you know. And we all of us have those times, and I kind of feel a little bit I do feel regretful for some of the things I did or said. I should have been a lot better and kinder and whatnot. And we have those things. But what am I going to do about it now? Do I dwell on it? You know, and now it's interesting though. It's not easy to leave those memories in the past, those regrets. You could say they attach themselves to us, and certainly if they don't attach to us, we attach to them. We identify, and they hang on. But our first job, remember, is to get out of the ditch. Then we can go back and fix it. But the question is, why do they hang on so tightly? And why is that? Well, like I say, there's an identification. And another story in thinking about, well, what do we do about this? And another story came to mind, and I call these stories, I've probably told them before, but it's about years ago, Swami Kriyananda told this story, and there's a part of Ananda village where he had his home there. It's now called the Crystal Hermitage, but in the early days, it was a very simple piece of property, and a simple home that he started with. And it was also the beginning of, he started our very first monastery there. And so he did various things to help get that created. And one night he returned home, and it was dark, and he got out of his car, and he was going to his where his house was, and he looked and he saw these twinkling of lights in the monastery that was there, and these various people living in their little kutirs. And he looked at it and he was very glad in his heart and satisfied. He says, look at that. He says, and the first thought that he says, isn't that nice? I created that, that nice place for other people to come and enjoy. And then immediately that thought had crossed his mind. And he thought, wait a minute, stop. He thought, do I like that thought? Well, that was a little pleasant. At first it was pleasant. He says, no, wait a minute. I didn't do that. That was Master's work. See, he caught himself, but he was taking credit for it to himself. He was gaining that egoic pleasure of, I did that. But in that same instant, he caught himself. He says, no, I don't like that thought. God created this. Master created it. It happened through me. I was but an instrument of something that turned out to be good. I didn't create that. It's not mine. And he caught himself, and he felt, originally it felt kind of pleasant watching the lights in the evening. But then he felt even better because, yes, it was God's creation and God was the instrument. That was a higher thought. And the point here is he didn't want to identify himself as the doer, even though that action was a good action. But he didn't want to say that it was my action. I did the good. Now sometimes we can say, oh yeah, that's a higher way of looking at it. And through doing good action, even in our own life, if we see that, we may accrue good karma from those good actions. But in the end, is it good karma that we really want? It's better than bad karma, certainly. But I think we want to ultimately transcend all karma. And so if that's positive, that we want to transcend I am the doer for positive things, and we take some credit to that. We think that's a good thing to do. Why, the question came to my mind, why would it not be the same for mistakes and missteps, the things that perhaps we do, and we look back on this last year and say, ooh, that wasn't a good one. But we're more likely, I found, at least amongst devotees. Now, people that are not spiritually minded, they may not share this, but people that are sincere, good intentions, good-hearted, and want to know God, sometimes they attach themselves more tightly to the mistakes and to the missteps that they took than to the positive things they did. But just as when we say, yes, I'm not going to be attached to those positive things, God was the doer, why can't we say the same things for the the mistakes that we made? God was the doer. It wasn't me. It was something that inspiration, just as it flows through us for the good things. Why do I take credit so easily for the mistakes? Now, that's kind of a radical way of sometimes thinking of us as, oh, well, that's not right. You got to feel bad. You got to feel guilty. You got to pay the price for those mistakes. And it's true. We do have to pay the price karmically for mistakes. But why do we attach ourselves more firmly to those and take responsibility and think that we were the doers from those? Well, you see, it's kind of an interesting thought. Think about that. And does it mean that am I saying that we have no responsibility for those? No, I'm not saying that. I mean, if we created those, well, then obviously if it was a karmic action, we do have to take it. But is there a need for us to feel guilty and bad about something? In other words, that's a way of payment. Do we need to pay that price right now? Is it helpful? Well, maybe it is sometimes, because otherwise we wouldn't be motivated to do something if something needs to be done right now. But I remember that there's a phrase that Swami uses in one of his songs. He says, why multiply pain with despair? We start to despair over some of those things. We think, oh, I'm no good. Look at how terrible I am. And it takes away, and I think this is big problem here. It takes away our energy to actually do something positive to make amends for what perhaps we did negatively. So, and I think what the necessity is here is for us to come to that state where Swami once said about himself is to detach ourselves, be more impersonal about ourselves. Swami once said, I see Swami Kriyananda as an event. I now see Swami Kriyananda as an event for which I must assume responsibility. I mean, we have responsibility, karmic, where it says body, this personality, it's been given to us. Are they ours? Well, we're responsible for them, but they're God's in the final analysis. And Swamiji was very impersonal toward himself, but he was very personal toward others, his dealings with others, but toward himself, he tended to take that impersonalness. And I think in this way, to be impersonal, to step back, it allows us to see what's the most effective thing we could do for the whole situation. If we've done wrong to somebody else or made a misstep that harmed ourselves, really, what is the real solution? Is it to beat ourselves over the head about that? Is that the punishment that's needed will that rectify the karma that has been accrued? Well, does it do if it's somebody that we harmed, you might say, does it help them to do that? I mean, they might enjoy us beating ourselves up, maybe, I don't know. But then, of course, is that really in their best interest for them to enjoy that? It's not easy, is it? It's not easy to figure out, but we have to sometimes be like a surgeon who must be effective, but yet detached from his patient. And so we have to be a little bit like that for ourselves. If you did something regrettable, we want to make amends for it, if possible. Make amends for it. That's being useful. And unfortunately, it was a long time ago. That person's passed on. Well, you can certainly send prayers and you can help other people in that person's name, perhaps. You can give that person, pray to God, maybe give that person you offended, say, God, give that person a little bit of my good karma. And I think actually this is true. This is actually what the Guru does for the disciples. Gives their good karma to their disciples, accrues good karma, and then shares it with other people. So if you do have good karma, why not share it? You can direct it. I don't know to what degree that's possible, but I'm sure if we're advanced enough, God listens to those prayers. Let's focus on learning our lesson. That's the thing. We do something that may be regrettable. The first thing is we have to learn the lesson, or first is we gotta stop the bleeding. You might say, stop repeating the mistake. That doesn't, and then of course, then we hopefully we learn the lesson. But things not to do. If you know that you've looked past this last year, what did you learn? Did we learn anything from the past year or the past decade? I think that sincere devotee looks with clear eyes. Don't attach yourself emotionally. I'm saying remove yourself, step back, see it clearly as best you can. And I think this is why we meditate. We raise our consciousness to that level where we can look a little bit clearly and leave the emotion aside a moment. Don't hide it. The things not to do, let's say, don't hide it. Sweep it under the rug. Don't deny it. Oh, I didn't really do that. It was somebody else's fault. I mean, that's not really true, maybe. Don't rationalize it. Well, like, wouldn't you have done that? It was all for, et cetera, et cetera. Some rational. Don't glorify it. That's maybe a person of low consciousness glorifies something. In all of these things, you might say another one, don't obsess about it, because it takes your energy away from doing something positive. But in other words, don't let guilt control you. And certainly most of all, you'd say, don't identify with it. I'm a bad person. That's me. What am I going to do? I'm always messing up in life. I can't help. But then you can sort of say, well, since that's, I can't help it. And, all of those things that we say. But we can recognize it's part of our soul history, if you say it in those terms, for which we have to assume responsibility, to whatever degree. It's like Swami, we're passing through, this entity has passed through life, which this body, this personality, which I've been given and to shepherd, you might say. But the important thing is, did we learn enough not to do it again, to be able to correct it? And then you see, when this opportunity is to do something positive, we do that. That situation comes again, and we don't do it, because if we don't learn our lesson, we have to do it again and again and again. It's like graduating from school. If we failed, well, we have to try again, repeat the grade until we can let it go. And then there's no attachment. And so we have to be positive about it. And this is what Master was saying with that man who passed on. And he hung on to that. We want to go into the next year, the next day, the next minute with that positive attitude. The past is done. I'm going to do my very best to improve day by day in every way. I'm getting better and better. And so this is sort of a natural impulse at the end of the year to approach the coming year. Make those resolutions, put energy into it. I think we were talking a couple of days ago, some of you attended our weekend retreat. I was saying it helps to make resolutions. Some people say, well, every time I make a resolution, I fail because I give up. I don't lose the 5 kilos or whatever it is that we're trying to do. So isn't that weakening my will? Well, to some degree, yes, if you identify with that failure. Rather, as Swami would say, I have not yet succeeded, try again. And I quoted those statistics that psychologists studying this dilemma that we face said you're 10 times more likely to succeed in future if you make a firm resolution, rather than to be afraid to make that resolution because you might fail. Resolve. And if you don't succeed, what's the old saying? Try again. And we keep doing it. And don't hold on to the past. That doesn't mean we don't take responsibility in it. But first, we have to do the necessities of getting ourselves to a point where we can be effective. And when we're effective, then we come back and we address the problem. On a spiritual level, Master said, what this really means is our job in life is to achieve that state of soul freedom. Become Jivan Mukta. Don't be attached. In that freedom of soul, then the job is for all souls. We do have to repair all of that karma. We have to then attend to all the karma from the past. See, because a free soul, a Jivan Mukta, still has that past karma and reincarnates again as a free soul, but has to deal with it. And sometimes, who knows how many lifetimes it will take, how much karma there might be. But fortunately, we don't have to work out that karma always in the physical way. Mentally, spiritually, that can be worked out many other ways. But that's a topic for another class that we'll give in the future. Now, I'm going to sign off now, but I want to mention that this is the end of the year, and this will be obviously the last Monday of the year, but it's also, I've decided that in the coming year, I'd like to change format a little bit. we've been doing these Monday classes steadily since the beginning of the pandemic. That's what that's what inspired this out of coming on Monday night pandemic. We couldn't talk to people in person, so we began to go online. And so I many times a week, and I retained at least this Monday night. And so on or this yeah, this Monday evening. And but after all of these consistently, with only very few breaks, I'd like to change. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. I won't be back next Monday. And until later, maybe at the very end of January or maybe beginning of February, we're going to start. And I'd like to start a new series. And we're going to, I've chosen, I wanted to speak a little bit about the Yoga Sutras. Now, many of the things I've been talking about on Monday night are very much in the day-to-day practicality. And I know some of you think, oh, the Yoga Sutras, oh my God. It's very philosophical, but there are some of you out there in the philosophical realm who have been asking me about these sorts of things. And I thought, well, what I want to do is I want to take some time. And we're not going to go page by page, but there are themes within the Yoga Sutras that I think I'd like to address. And you might say I'm indulging myself in that philosophical side that I have. So I'd like to do that for a while and share with you. And I hope you'll be interested enough to join me. I want to make it, I hope we can make it interesting, and I hope we can make it pertinent to our day-to-day life, because the Yoga Sutras are a scripture. And a true scripture is what Yoganandaji said, is something that should apply to us on all levels. Philosophically, yes, of course, but also day to day as well. And so I hope I won't make it dry, but I thought it might be interesting to take a little bit of tack. So I have to pull down the book and blow off the dust, and I'm going to think about it a little bit, and then and tend to some other things that are pressing at the moment. And we'll be back in about, let's say a month. We'll be back at that time. So I want to say it to all of you. I hope you'll join me for that. And it'll be on Mondays again. And it's been a pleasure being able to do these subjects which have necessarily always don't have a topic. Far up sometimes at the very last moment, Jaya, what are you going to talk about? And I've had to come up with a topic title. So this will save me a little bit from that, perhaps. So anyway, thank you all. And I see a whole bunch of you have given me some chat messages here, which I'll address today. You know how I am. I sometimes forget. And most of them are about sound and Yoga Sutras. Oh, yes, one very good practical question. Which book should we read? And Bharat, I don't have my copy here, but Swami Kriyananda wrote a and this was in his latter years when he was doing his Gita interpretations. He also did one about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And I would recommend, this is available on, I think it's in hard copy, I know, which I would recommend because it's a little easier and to carry around with you. Or you can get the online copy. You can go to Ananda Publications and you can download it to a Kindle. And if you don't have a Kindle, you can get the Kindle app for your computer or your phone or whatever and read it that way. But at scripture, I think of scripture, I think, oh, I've got this piece of paper in front of me, but I'm old-fashioned, you see. But so that is available, and I see somebody put demystifying Patanjali as its official title, and I see the link there. So so please, if you're going to join us, that would be best, because I'll be referring here and there to such and such a sutra, and so you can study along. And if you're really a devotee, you should have these things on your bookshelf, because this is a lifetime journey that we're embarking on. And let's see, okay, I think that's got it. And somebody shared, please share the link. It's up there somewhere. Just scroll on up. So joy to you. I hope you've had a very wonderful holiday season, Christmas season. You know, this is also, there's all sorts of other religions, the Jewish holidays, the African holidays, Kwanzaa. There's, I can't think of one in Christmas for in India, but I'm sure there are because there's so many. And I wish you very much a very happy new year. So let's reconvene in about a month for those who are interested. Joy to all of you and your questions and commentaries, especially when we get to the Yoga Sutras. Obviously, it's a realm for a lot of questions, and we can have that discussion. And there's no time limits on how many weeks we'll go forward. Until we then, maybe we'll come back to this format again at that time. Joy to you. Joy to you. God bless everybody.